Thank you for joining us, Philip.
You're welcome, Paul.
So let's start off with your journey into the ICT community. How did that come about?
So, back in the late 60s, I was a kid playing with electronics, loved all that technical stuff, loved to find out how things worked, why things worked, and the answer was generally physics or the law. So I thought, well, I liked all of those things. I kept asking why, how. So I ended up going into law. UNSW had just started a new faculty. Never had any graduates. Everyone said there's only one law school in Sydney University. If you go anywhere else, you'll never get a job. I thought that's a challenge. UNSW offered a new combined law degree with commerce. Sydney Uni only offered an arts degree.
Right.
So I'm not interested in arts. I liked the idea of commerce. That was the only other. They had arts or commerce. That was about 1970. I was looking at that, and so I enrolled in commerce law. Didn't want to be an accountant. Didn't want to be an auditor.
Right.
But I really liked the information systems major, which they had. Which started out as decision support systems, basically information systems for improving the quality of management information,
right,
generally. So and that was relatively new sort of science, if you like, in those days.
Yep.
The bit that intrigued me at the time was included in that course and that stream was programming. In the true sense.
Yep.
And in those days, the newest fangled thing was PL1,
right,
which was a new combination of Fortran, the best of Fortran with the best of COBOL.
Right.
So it had the string handling of COBOL and the mathematical capabilities of Fortran,
right,
all mixed together.
Yep.
That was said to be the new latest and greatest thing and would supersede everything else.
Yeah.
Famous last words, but that's what we got taught. And I loved that, but it was a compiler language. So I learnt to two-finger touch type on an old IBM 29 key punch.
Right.
Create punch cards.
Yep.
You'd put the deck in at night, and in theory you'd get back the next morning your printout.
Right.
And the results of running it. Which 9 times out of 10 for me it was you've left out a semicolon. The compiler has assumed this,
right,
generally wrongly, and there's 40 pages of error messages and, right, no result.
Yeah.
Or alternatively you've got an uncontrolled loop terminated after 100 loops.
Right. Yeah.
I tell that story only because it brought a discipline to programming that no one has anymore.
Sure.
So you would learn to desk check your code and run it manually on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
You'd do flow charting to check the logic. So it was purely the coding you had to proofread properly.
Yes.
That it was very syntactically temperamental and idiosyncratic. But that was a good discipline because when it came to doing interpreted languages, which effectively was the next step between a compiled language and a fully interpreted language, you didn't need to do all that stuff. You'd write your code and then hit run.
Yeah.
And it would effectively compile on the fly. Dartmouth Basic had just become the vogue as the learning tool for entry-level programmers.
Yep.
I absolutely loved BASIC. Wrote a lot of stuff in BASIC. Even became a tutor in BASIC in the commerce faculty while I was doing law.
Yeah.
It very quickly became clear to me that law and programming were very complementary disciplines. Everyone said, what? Most lawyers don't know the difference between a megabyte and a mosquito bite.
Sure.
I said, no, they're both rules-based systems.
Right.
The analytical processes of taking a problem and programming a solution
Yep.
within the constraints of particular systems are very tight analogues.
Yeah.
And I built my computer law practice and my global career on these simple propositions that I could bridge the two disciplines.
Right.
It was still early days for IT disputes, but they were already starting.
Sure.
So even in I think 1978 or thereabouts, I was sitting in court one morning. One of the judges running the commercial list called me to the front of the court and said, "Mr. Argy, can you explain to these people the difference between the operating system, application code, and the hardware?" Said, because they don't seem to understand it. And it was perfectly clear that what he meant was, I don't understand it.
Right.
But no judge will ever admit to not understanding something. But he put it that way. Anyway, I said, well, very simple, Your Honour. The hardware is the courtroom. The operating system are the rules of court. And the application code are the pleadings. And that remains to this day a exceptionally accurate analogy for mapping legal system concept to IT concept.
Right.
It fits perfect.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still use that to explain that to judges who can't quite work out what level something is at.
Yes.
You can use it for lots of different things, for the different layers of architecture of things. They're very strong analogies because they're both rules-based systems.
Right.
You know, and if you take a programming language, you've got a limited vocabulary. The rules of court constrain what you can do. You can't just do whatever you like.
Sure.
So you've got to be mindful of the constraints when you're programming a solution to a problem. So I started flowcharting legislation to find defects in it.
Okay.
So the Spam Act, in fact, was one of the earliest ones.
Yeah.
And I presented my flowchart to the Attorney General when the bill was still in draft form, and they fixed it
Right.
based on my flowchart that demonstrated it had dead ends and non sequiturs in the legislation.
Right.
Everyone said, "Wow, that's amazing." I said, "Not really." They thought I was doing something amazing.
Yeah.
It turns out I wrote the first legal expert system in Australia, which was no more than a piece of basic code designed to stop people annoying me in my office, asking me dumb questions about the Trade Practices Act, which was new in 1974, happened to be my specialty because I'd studied it at uni.
Yeah.
So I would forever get people knocking on my door asking me about it. But they'll be always asking the same questions. So I put a terminal outside my office door, effectively screening. I said, if it tells you don't have a problem, believe it. If it tells you do, I'll agree to talk to you.
Right, fair enough. Yeah.
And that was literally yes, no, basic, written in basic, on an old Wang MVP computer that I just plonked there. Years later, that was written up as the first legal expert system in Australia.
Okay, yeah.
So then came to about that was 78. I think the year after that, we had a big case for tube makers involving a metallurgical flaw in a pipeline.
Right.
And I'd got level 1 physics at high school because I still loved my physics. But I was a very junior lawyer, so I was in the meeting to take notes while my supervising partner interviewed expert witnesses.
Right.
But he'd done an arts degree in humanities and history, and here's him trying to interview physicists about the metallurgical flaws in the pipeline. So me being not very shy and retiring, started piping up, and they'd say something or other, and I'd say, and is that to do with grain size, or was it to do with the ultrasonic well testing? And everyone looks at me and says, aren't you just the note taker? How do you know about this stuff? I said, it's simple physics.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I built a whole career as a technology lawyer based on my programming skills, my understanding of the tight analogies, my physics, and discovered that 99% of lawyers were technology averse.
Right.
Not
Yes.
just incompetent in terms of not understanding the difference between megabyte and multibyte, but didn't want to know the
Yeah,
difference,
sure.
didn't want to get into it. Thought it was all, even now,
Yeah.
you know, what's that, 30, 40, 50 years, God almighty.
Yeah, you still hear
50,
it.
50 years have
Yeah.
gone by,
Yeah.
and still the majority of lawyers are technology averse, not just technology incompetent. And here we've got, you know, smart contracts, all sorts of things happening. AI, oblivious,
Yeah.
oblivious and head in the sand.
Right. Yeah.
So one of my earliest assignments, once it became known that I knew something about computing, was to be put in charge of what was then called office automation. And like any good lawyer, I said, what's the definition of office automation? And the answer was anything that plugs into a PowerPoint.
Right.
So I thereafter became the custodian of not only word processors and electric typewriters, but toasters and photocopiers.
Yeah.
Literally anything that plugged into a PowerPoint. That was technology, so far as lawyers were concerned.
Right.
So the old wet photocopier, probably before you were born, but you used to have wet developing fluid, and then you could only get the image by putting it through drying rollers.
Right.
But if you got a paper jam, the drying rollers would set fire to the paper. Then you had to put out the fire.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah.
I happened to be had the office as a newbie lawyer closest to the library. That's where the photocopier was.
Yeah.
Back in the days when a library was a thing. That was your source of knowledge.
Yeah.
And whenever the librarian screamed, Philip, it's on fire again, I would have to go and unjam it and
Right.
snuff out the smouldering remains
Right.
on the carpet.
That opens up some liability too.
It doesn't it? But again, the only part of that story is I developed a reputation as someone who knew about technology stuff,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't technology stuff. For a lawyer, almost anything was technology stuff.
Sure.
If it wasn't history or ancient Greek or Shakespeare or something in the humanities. When it came to talking about bits or bytes or physics or metallurgical flaws in a pipeline, like my first, one of my first cases. As I said, I was there as the junior lawyer to take some notes. My supervising partner was interviewing the expert witnesses.
Yep.
And he didn't have the foggiest what they were talking about. He was just asking them questions, flailing around,
Yep.
till I piped up and said, oh, well, you're talking about grain size, or you're talking about a failure of the ultrasonic testing of the seams. They said, yes, that's what happened. The ultrasonic testing failed.
Yep.
And I said, well, and I said, is that from lack of contact with the pipe by the sensor or operator error?
Right.
They said there was a little wheel that's supposed to run along the weld and make contact. And then inside the pipe is a corresponding sensor moving forward, and it tells that where there's a failure of the weld thickness,
Right.
which is a weakness in the pipeline,
Yep.
which is why it leaked. The ultrasonic testing failed because the operator didn't make sure that the bit inside the pipe was operating as it should have.
Right.
So once there was a gap, it couldn't tell the difference between a lack of thickness in the weld
Yeah.
and every other piece of the weld because it was a gap.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, so that was a whole product liability case. But as a result of that case, I got a reputation as a technology lawyer. Since then, everything that was remotely related to science or technology, and then by extension intellectual property, came to me.
Yeah.
And I ended up building a practice.
Right.
I mean, I had not even studied intellectual property at law school. My legal specialties were the New Trade Practices Act, just competition law, consumer law, product liability law,
Yep.
but not much intellectual property. But it soon became a big thing with the first Apple and Computer Edge case, big dispute about whether software was covered by copyright.
Yeah.
And the earliest decision, an early Apple case, Justice Beaumont said software isn't covered by copyright because it's got no aesthetic value.
Right.
And the popular view at the time, and he cited lots of cases, was that, you know, a novel or a poem or piece of art or whatever it is a creation of the mind
Yeah.
and entitled to copyright protection. But a piece of software is too utilitarian
Right.
to be amenable to copyright. And I came along cheekily and said, well, this is on the appeal. I was a consultant to the people running the appeal. And I said to them, well, here's a recipe book I've just brought from home. It claims copyright in the recipes. I said, well, is there aesthetic value? Do you read recipes for enjoyment and pleasure? And everyone said, no, but what's that got to do with anything? I said, well, a computer program is a recipe for a computer.
Yes.
Tells it how to cook.
Yeah.
And the minute the judges got that, they said, oh, yeah, you must be right. So literally based on the Argy assertion that a computer program was a recipe for a computer and recipes are covered by copyright, the government changed the Copyright Act
Right.
to say that a computer program was a literary work and covered by copyright.
Right.
So, so again, I sort of made a name by doing things like that. Another famous case I ran was the Ice TV case in the High Court, where there was an argument that Channel 9 owned the date and time at which a TV program would go to air.
That's right. Yeah.
And Ice TV had their own EPG, Electronic Program Guide,
Yep.
which they compiled by having somebody watch TV and then predict when things would be on, and they wrote their own EPG.
Right.
Channel 9 said, no, you could only have copied ours. How could you possibly know that the 6 p.m. news is on at 6 p.m. every night?
Yeah.
You know, we said, or Days of Our Lives, or whatever it might be, because I've watched enough of them. I can now predict that what will be on next week will be the same as what was on this week, just a different episode.
Yeah.
And by the way, Australia's so far behind everybody else, I can go on the website and Google Days of Our Lives and see the whole episode list.
Yep.
And if you ran episode 427 last week, I predict you're going to run episode 429 this week.
Right. Yeah.
And they said, how could you possibly know what's going to be on? You must have copied, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Sure.
Anyway, we ran that case and proved that Channel 9 didn't own copyright in the time and date at which something was going to air.
Yeah.
And that was a landmark case. So I have a lot of history in running landmark cases. I ran a landmark case against Telstra, whether a domain name can be a trademark. And I basically had to persuade the High Court that the whole point of a domain name was to reflect your trademark.
Yes,
It was basically your trademark plus the domain.
Yeah.
The second level domain and the first level domain. So again, I've got a history of kind of being able to bridge between the law and technology in ways that, unless you are across both disciplines, you can't explain one to the other. So I explain law to IT people and IT to legal people.
Right.
And still do to this day. And so after I retired from the law after 34 years, I started doing mediating, arbitrating, expert determination in IT, IP, all these areas.
Yeah.
So I had another case where an outsourcing contract was developed, and the project was to move from centralised printing on a, if you can still remember them, 132 character line printer,
Right.
with sprocket fed
Yep.
landscape
Yep.
giant
Shattering away there.
paper,
Yep.
with alternating colours. Remember those old big printouts?
Yep.
So the traditional way of high volume printing was to send everything to this central print room and then have a courier take it to whoever had asked for it,
Yep.
because it wasn't feasible to print high volumes local to the user.
Yeah, sure.
So it didn't matter whether you were in the same building or even across town. It was efficient to send it all to the high-speed printer,
Yep.
churn it out,
Yep.
and get it shipped back to the user. This project that involved shutting down the central print room and moving out to now high-speed, I think they were dot matrix printers, but they're still way faster than anything anyone had before. And it was now feasible to give people, and they discovered the productivity gains by having people get up from their desk and walk to there and get their print out immediately.
Yep. Sure.
Justified this project. They had agreed with the outsourcing provider that they would be remunerated based on the productivity of these decentralised printers.
Right.
So as the volume of output moved to the satellite centres, the remuneration would go up, so that it would track how well they were doing the project.
Right.
And the more it grew, the faster it grew, the faster they would recoup their fee.
Yep.
The dispute arose because the opposite was the case. The more they rolled out printers, the lower the volume count was.
Right.
And they so the outsourced provider accused the client of tampering with the figures, but to get around it, they started claiming extras under the contract. Like all big projects, they can claim extras.
Yeah, sure.
They couldn't increase their remuneration other than by claiming extras.
Right.
But they brought me in to rule, to make it, I think at the time it was, I think I was asked to make an expert determination that the client had been fudging things. It took me about 30 minutes of research to discover that the contract had specified as the criterion for, or a proxy for volume of print, a specific piece of software which counted lines of print
Right.
generated by 3 models of IBM line printer. So even though the commercial arrangement was supposed to be counting how much print output was now going to these satellite printers,
Yes.
the contract had hard-coded in the volume output from 3 line printers, which by definition were being reduced in output.
Right. Yeah.
So I said, you've got a choice. I can rule on what you've asked me to rule on, which will be the client hasn't tampered with anything. They're enforcing the contract. But the contract has embodied a mistake. It doesn't reflect the commercial deal you've done.
Yes.
I said, how about we mediate, and the outcome of the mediation is that you agree to vary the contract. We'll find an alternative proxy that reflects what you intended, that is the productivity of these printers.
Yep.
The lawyers in the room said, no, you do the task that we commissioned you to do.
Yep.
The client said to the lawyers, go outside.
Right.
We like his idea.
Yeah.
And within 10 minutes, we'd agreed on an alternative proxy and resolved it. But again, only because with my technical knowledge I could identify where the mistake was.
Yeah.
No one had tampered with anything. The lawyers, no one could tell me how the lawyers agreed on this criterion. They dug it out of a book.
Yeah.
They'd seen that this program counts print output, but didn't go deeply enough into it to realise it was counting the wrong thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So again, not to big note myself, just to really exemplify how I was in the right place at the right time. I was able to leverage and blend nicely legal and technical skills, computing.
Yeah.
That led to, in 1982, I was working with a senior partner at Price Waterhouse. They weren't called that at the time. They were what they called something else, back when they were credible.
Right, yes. Yeah.
But he was involved in the ACS, and he said to me, they've got some legal problems, can I put them onto you?
Right.
I said, sure. So I started doing a bit of work for the New South Wales branch, advising them, and then got interested in them and then joined as a member with him as my referee.
Yeah.
So I was one of the earliest solicitors to ever be a member of the ACS.
Right.
Back in fact, 1981 I joined
Okay.
the ACS. So I'm coming up to my 43rd year, or just past my 43rd anniversary.
Right.
I think I'm entitled to a certificate or something, by the way, if anyone's watching.
Yeah.
I haven't got it yet.
Yeah.
And so yeah, then I got more involved in ACS, went on the BEC, became branch president, went on to become national president, was on the old management committee in the old days, which was what is now Congress, and they've sort of swapped around.
Right. Yeah.
And then was on Congress, then became a Congress coach under President Brenda Ainsley.
Right.
So, my ACS career spans a long time. Got very passionate about professionalism. Still have as my signature, in my signature block, professionalism is the best risk management strategy.
Right.
Championed the ACS Code of Ethics. I've been on ACS Ethics Committee since probably 1992 from memory, something like that.
Right.
And give lectures still on the business case for professionalism and analogizing it to being green and environmentally friendly, which 30 years ago no one thought could be turned to commercial advantage.
Yeah.
Now, in the same way that being green can be leveraged for commercial benefit,
Yeah.
my view is professionalism in IT is a good risk management strategy. So preaching to government that, for example, if you specify ACS membership in your employment ads, that means something.
Yeah.
It shows you value professionalism and all of that. In IT security, you can walk in off the street and self-proclaim your credentials in IT security.
Sure.
And people wonder why we still get hacking and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Whereas my proposition is, if you employ professionals, you are managing that risk much better.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of technical competence. A lot of time it's an ethical and professional approach to things.
Yeah.
I remember when I was president, going back, 18 years ago, my goodness, time flies, you're having fun. So 18 years ago, Microsoft came to me and complained that an MCSE, a Microsoft certified software engineer, could not, on the basis of that credential, become a professional member of the ACS. And they complained that that was shocking, that these were highly skilled people. I said, yes, they're highly skilled technicians. Where in your MCSE training is there an ethics component? Where is the public interest mentioned in your training?
Right. Yeah.
They said, well, it's not. I said, well, go and read the definition of a professional. Right? It's somebody who understands the public interest and gives priority to the public interest. I said, here's an example. you can have two robotics programmers, highly competent, technically competent to program the robot. And if the robot's asked to move this glass of water from A to B, they can both program the robot to do that. I said, but the difference is the ACS member, being a professional, will see what sensory capabilities does the robot have and say to it, just check there's no human sitting between A and B before you do that.
Yeah.
So just being attuned to what the public interest might mean. So that's a facile example, but practical manifestation is these days, what's the least privacy intrusive way of achieving something? And, you know, it's literally, that was an example I gave 10 years ago. Now what are we seeing? All the hacking and people saying, maybe we didn't need to gather so much information to achieve this objective. Had this been thought about more, we wouldn't have just said, let's grab all of it in case we need it. Let's work out what's the minimum we need and do it differently. And that's the difference between a professional and a highly skilled technician.
Absolutely.
And that's the advantage to the public. And that's why I still am a great evangelist for professionalism and what the ACS stands for. And that's the point of difference that we should keep pushing. It is risk management. It is the public interest. And they're practical examples of how that manifests itself. So, and you know, another great hobby horse of mine, when people talk about trusted systems, I said, that's the absolute worst of all. I mean, people have gotten on to zero trust, but I say learn the difference between trusted and trustworthy. So think of the 4-quadrant matrix that we use for a lot of things. You can have trusted and trustworthy, trusted but untrustworthy, untrustworthy and trusted, untrustworthy and not trusted. The worst of all is trusted but untrustworthy, but not known to be untrustworthy. And phishing and hacking and all of the social engineering, malevolent social engineering, is in that trusted but untrustworthy category. I said, and that's because you keep talking about trusted this and trusted that. The criterion should be trustworthy people, processes and systems. And what zero trust is doing is saying, assume untrustworthy and don't trust. Find something objective that means you're not relying on trust, you're relying on objective proof. And had people better understood that difference years earlier, they would have done it that way. You know, and the problem was it created the illusion of trustworthiness, which made it a honeypot for hackers, because they realised how weak all the systems were. You know, go back even to the early days of open system relays, where you could ping every second system. Had an open relay, you could just walk in and completely trust it. And anyway, I mean, they're all my little hobby horses, but I mean, they're all designed to explain why I've never lost my passion for evangelising professionalism. You've just got to continually explain to people not only why conceptually it's important, but the practical commercial advantages of seeking professionals in your organisation. And the other big thing I really think is important is explaining to people that ACS members don't work in the IT profession, or don't work in the IT industry. So we often have issues with, for example, the IT industries associations, all the different associations. Say, but just remember this, our members work everywhere. They work in the IT department of every other organisation, but if you work in a bank, that's not the IT industry. If you work in a school, that's not the IT, but you are an IT practitioner. And I say to those people, the importance of belonging to the ACS is that's where your kindred spirits are.
Yep.
They're not in banking people, and they're not in school teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, they can still be your friends, but
Yeah.
if you actually want to specialise in IT, you need to be part of the professional body that practices your art.
Yeah.
So, all of this is a long-winded way of explaining why I'm still passionate about the ACS and how to market the ACS and why to market the ACS on all the sides, on the prospective employer and engaged, the prospective member, saying to students, this is not a social club, and it's not for paper boat people,
Right. Yeah.
which is another issue altogether. But that's an important role. I mean, we are objectively saying, are you really coming here because of your IT skill sets, which we desperately need, which we're not churning out enough of, and things like that. And then, get me started on women in IT. I mean, as a senior partner at Mallesons, people said, how come 70% of your associates are female? So because the female brain is fabulous at intellectual property and at problem solving.
Yeah.
And at technology, at the analytical skills that make you good at IT and programming and business analysis must be left brain or something like that women are good at.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sexist thing. We would take the cream of anybody, lots of guys as well, but women happen to have a particular aptitude for IT, which is still not readily acknowledged or understood. But we've had some fabulous examples of female IT experts, particularly in quantum computing now, female-led quantum computing. Absolutely world class. Just get it.
Yeah,
but a lot of folks don't. So I love championing things like that, and I'd like to think that the ACS has a big role to play in educating people on the importance of professionalism generally. For all of those reasons, but I'll stop rabbiting on.
No, that's okay.
I've only answered your first question.
No, that's all right. Well, that's a good segue actually to my final question, and you've covered a lot of what I was going to ask anyway. But what's your advice to somebody coming into the industry today?
I think understand the difference between a job and a profession. I know it's very popular these days to say you can have 20 jobs, whereas in my day, like at Mallesons, I was there for 34 years. But the beauty of a legal role is that you never know what's going to happen each morning. There's something new coming in the door, so it's quite diverse. And as far as I'm concerned, I got paid to practice my hobby. I mean, it was wonderful stuff. I did the first case where metadata was a thing, and I managed to prove witnesses were lying by giving them metadata, things that they hadn't even heard of. One of my earliest cases involved Ristus, which was a very rare operating system on digital equipment machines. Ristus stood for resource sharing, time sharing.
Okay.
It was a particular operating system you would use where you wanted to bill the users for the time slices they'd used on mainframe. But it had a very good audit trail so that you could prove who had used what, where and when and send them a bill for it. But it was also a good audit trail for who did what, where and when. That if you knew how to mine it, you had very objective evidence of who did what, where and when. So when they swear in the witness box something did or didn't happen, you could present it with them and prove them a liar. And I won a big case with using metadata, and I was one of the earliest to prove the evidentiary value of metadata. And that was 15 years before the Attorney General tried to fluff what metadata was.
Yes, indeed.
So things like that, but that's incredibly satisfying to continually be able to bridge the disciplines. You know, people say the law doesn't keep up with science and technology.
Yeah.
Legal principles are as immutable as the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
Moses didn't have to know about laser guns
Right.
to say thou shalt not murder, because it was mode of murder independent.
Yeah.
And so my job is to help people understand that you don't hard code any technology, you hard code the principle.
Yeah.
And whatever the current day technology is, if you understand the facts, you'll get the law right.
Yeah.
People say the law doesn't keep up with technology. It's not the law that doesn't keep up with technology, it's the lawyers that don't keep up with technology because they don't understand the facts. You know, all these things about where are you doing what you're doing. If something's happening on a website, who is doing it and where?
Yeah.
What law covers it? Things like that. And we're seeing now, you know, big dispute about if Australia wants you to remove something from the internet, where are you doing it? What jurisdiction do you have?
Sure.
Can Australia decide what anybody on the planet gets to see?
Yeah.
If the server's in Australia, B, if it's uploaded in Australia, C, if none of it's happening in Australia other than reading it.
Yeah, sure.
All of those are important legal issues, but if you don't understand the facts,
Yeah.
you don't understand that stuff is on a server somewhere in a jurisdiction and someone is uploading it from somewhere to that server.
Yeah.
And in either case, they're amenable to the jurisdiction they're physically in and not otherwise.
Yep.
All that kind of stuff needs somebody who gets both and can apply the principle to the facts. You don't need to change the law. The principles are sound.
Yeah.
Shut up for a while. You
No,
must have
that's-
other questions.
No, that's
I must
good.
have run out of
So-
time.
well-
Or disk space, or both.
Well, I think that it's actually both. But yeah, so on that, just going back to your career with your volunteering rather with ACS. So you came into ACS 1980,
1981.
right? And
Started out doing a bit of legal work for the New South Wales branch.
Yep.
Went on the New South Wales BEC, was then branch president for a while.
Yep.
Then, as branch president, became a national rep, or what's now called national rep.
Yep.
Spent about, I think I had 3 2-year terms as VP. Then moved into president back in 2006. Then was immediate past president for another couple of years. Then came back as an advisor to Congress, chaired the disciplinary committee for some 25 years,
Right.
wearing both my legal hat and my technologist hat. And still very passionate about the ACS, as you might have gathered.
Yeah. Particularly the professionalism side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really key.
Well, just to set you off on that again, how do you see professionalism in the age of AI and what we're doing now with data?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all about transparency.
Yeah.
The biggest problem with AI is the lack of transparency. People not knowing when it's being used, or if it's being used, or how it's being used, or what it is using.
Yeah.
What's the large language base it's drawing on? And you know, it's a bit like, I talk a lot about value systems, particularly in robotics. With whose value system do you imbue your robot?
Yeah.
Robots can do anything they're programmed to do.
Yeah.
But Vladimir Putin's value system would be somewhat different from ours.
Sure. Yeah.
His robot would do things our robots wouldn't do.
Yeah.
What's the ethics of that? What if you're asked to program his robot? Do you say no? Or do you simply replace it with your value system?
Yeah.
We're going to get robot warfare. Going to get robots saying, you humans are incredibly inefficient. You need to sleep, you need to eat, you get sick.
Yeah.
We'll just replace you all with robots. You're dispensable.
Yeah.
People say, oh, that's science fiction. It's not science fiction. Because without ethics on the part of those building them, there's enough unethical people who will build a robot
Yep.
that's ruthless, doesn't have an override button. You can't lift its shirt and push the emergency stop button.
Yep.
or whatever the equivalent is.
Yep.
That's a big deal for humanity.
Yep.
And there's a core of people talking about that stuff, but by definition, they're the responsible ones. The irresponsible ones are gone off, you know, and I don't think there's near enough effort being put into putting in place a world order where humans remain in control.
Yep.
And again, I mean, I'm a great skeptic about almost everything, but I know as a programmer, the computer will do what you program it to do.
Right.
It's not making any independent thought. And what's more, it'll do what it's programmed to do, not what you intended.
Right.
So if you wrongly program it or malevolently program it, it doesn't say, "Oh, can't do that, Hal," unless it's programmed to do so.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that's a big challenge for IT professionals to, at the mundane level, you know, is there a less privacy intrusive way of achieving this objective on a day-to-day basis, over to whose value system do we imbue this AI with?
Yeah.
Or how do we make sure that its thought processes are transparent? If you start to get AI judges, what are they deciding on?
Yeah.
Who's right and who's wrong, based on what?
What are the guidelines?
How do you audit it? Where is there a audit trail of what it considered? So an appeal court can say, no, it got it wrong. All it's got's the output. And you ask it what it did, it says, I looked at the law, or whatever.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
things like that. So part of it is a professional will say to ChatGPT or whatever, how did you arrive at that? Tell me what things you considered. So it will tell you, but if you don't ask it, you won't know. All of that kind of stuff.
That's a lot of work to be done.
So more important than ever,
Yeah.
because it's so much more pervasive,
Yeah.
so much more embedded in everything. We are actually completely dependent now on the professionalism of those who are creating it. And you've seen people stand up before the US Congress and give evidence that, hey, we're at the forefront and we're putting out a warning signal, waving a red flag.
Yeah.
This could quickly get out of control. That's being professional about it.
Yeah. So that's a great opportunity for ACS and a lot
Absolutely,
of,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time today.